Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. Welcome to this webinar on South-South development tools, technology, and innovations, innovations that support the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially those that impact children. The webinar is jointly organized by UNICEF, the International Policy Center for Inclusive Growth, and the UN Office for South-South Cooperation. Next. Our webinar today is hosted by our Community of Practice on South-South Cooperation for Children, a joint initiative of our three organizations. It's a relatively new community launched in February this year, 2018, and it is hosted in the socialprotection.org platform of the IPC-IG. Like other SSC modalities, this online community aims at bringing together practitioners from different sectors, in our case, those who promote and support South-South cooperation for the purpose of advancing the rights and welfare of children and achieving the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. We invite you to join the community if you are not yet a member and help us in shaping the global South-South cooperation work for children. In today's session, it is part of a series of webinars that aim to share interesting development solutions using South-South cooperation modalities. And in our topic today, we are going to look at the added value of South-South cooperation in expanding access to development tools, technology, and innovations for children. We will have three speakers, Tanya Akone, Maria Eugenia Socio, and Hannah Sahatkia. Next. You may be able to submit your questions anytime during the webinar. All you have to do is type them in the chat bar and we will try to address them. Next. I will be the moderator for today's webinar. My name is Marta Santos and I am the Program Manager for South-South Cooperation in UNICEF. Achieving the ambitious SDGs for children by 2030, especially for the hardest to reach, requires a divergence from the business as usual approach. Investing in and incubating breakthrough solutions and approaches are critical to meet evolving challenges facing children today. Increasingly, these tools, technology, and innovations are emerging from the global south in response to the specific needs of developing countries, and they are often available at a lower cost. In recognition of this, UNICEF identifies and nurtures proven innovations, solutions, and tools, and increasingly uses South-South cooperation to replicate and bring them to scale in multiple developing countries and in varying contexts. Next, please. This webinar will present three projects, showcasing how South-South cooperation expands access to development tools, use of technology, and innovations for children. Our first presentation is on Rapid Pro, an open software framework that uses mobile phones to help service providers collect information on the hardest to reach children and communities. It will be presented by Tanya Akone, Senior Advisor on Innovation from UNICEF's Global Innovation Center. She is outposted from UNICEF's headquarters office to our office in Bangkok for global outreach. Tanya leads the scale-up in UNICEF of proven innovations across 190 countries on innovation for scale. Next, please. Our second presentation is on Global Kids Online, a multi-country project supporting countries in the Global South to develop research tools and policy agenda around online child protection. It will be presented by Maria Eugenia Socio, ICT Kids Online Project Coordinator from the Regional Center for Studies on the Development of the Information Society. Maria coordinates the Brazilian Kids Online Survey, a nationwide representative survey on the use of internet by children in Brazil. Next, please. And our third presentation is on Upshift, a youth-led innovation program addressing youth employment. It will be presented by Hannah Sahatkia, Adolescent Development Officer from UNICEF Innovations Lab. Hannah initiated, co-designed, and managed several initiatives that have been replicated in multiple countries. While these programs are distinct in their scope, approach, and potential, a common feature that links them is how they shape solutions that are homegrown in developing countries, which are then scaled up across the world using various South-South cooperation modalities. This webinar, we will take a closer look at these elements and discuss the results and potential to further expand access to them and ensure their sustainability using South-South cooperation. Next, please. You may submit your questions in the chat box anytime during the webinar, but we will take 1 or 2 questions after each presentation. We will have the Q&A session after all 3 presentations. With that brief introduction, let me hand over to Tanya Acone from the UNICEF Global Innovation Center. Tanya, over to you, please. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. And if we can move to the next slide, thank you for the opportunity to share how innovation and technology can not only benefit from applying South-South cooperation modalities in order to scale, embed in a very sustainable way, but we also hope to share with the audience today how innovation and technology can also be a driver and an enabler of South-South cooperation. As Martha, you explained, the RapidPro real-time information platform really enables anyone with very minimal technical requirements or background to connect and build interactive messaging flows that can allow people to connect information in real time that is relevant for any sector and any geography. I am looking forward to sharing the RapidPro story with you. And if we can move to the next slide, please. We really feel that RapidPro is an example of an innovation that has at its heart the South. It was born, bred, built, and scaled in and by the South. And if we could move to the next slide, it really started in the South. Born in the South, in Eastern and Southern Africa, almost a decade ago. It really applied these 2 South-South cooperation modalities, and you'll see in the coming slides, and we try to highlight specifically which modalities were particularly impactful at which stages of RapidPro's growth from an idea to a real-time information platform that is applied by UNICEF and others across 53 countries in the world, across every sector that UNICEF works in. In this initial stage, if we can move to the next slide, we really found that building a very small knowledge community and sharing that information around the initial idea, which began in 2007 in Zambia, testing out whether you could move the results for early infant diagnosis faster by using SMS than traditional methods. And of course, that is the case. In starting with that first idea, we managed to halve the time that it took from 6 to 3 weeks for infants and for mothers to receive their diagnosis of whether their child had been born HIV/AIDS positive or not. And for those of you who work in this area, you would recognize that it is extremely important window to begin treatment in, and that halving that is of course just one way that you can have an incredible impact with real-time information. But it did take us quite a while before we reached the first country to apply RapidPro's predecessor at national scale. And what that meant is every single district, every single health facility, and all 63,000 health workers using this mobile tool on a simple phone. And that's really because we didn't have all the rest of those modalities in place. We didn't have a robust sort of solution. We didn't have the architecture in our organization yet that enabled us to scale faster and to connect very effectively all the countries that were becoming very interested in being able to use, replicate, adopt, and adapt the solution. But one of the modalities that was extremely effective in 2012, 2013, when I spent a number of months each year at our Uganda lab, was that of study visits, and particularly those from ministries of health, education, planning, etc., of various countries. And those study exchanges, those expertise missions were incredibly helpful for people to come and see, experience, and for government counterparts to discuss with each other what that experience was like, to discover firsthand what were some of the challenges, difficulties, and advantages of applying mobile phone technology to move, in most cases, from the paper that you see in that middle photograph to bits and bytes of data that moved, instead of months, to minutes. For example, in the summer of 2013, in a mere 6 weeks, I hosted 11 government visits to Uganda, and we used to joke about it being somewhat of running a travel agency at the time. But almost every one of those 11 countries, very shortly, within a year, actually were able to adopt and use this platform, simply also because they'd had a lot of experience and trust in speaking to their counterparts. If we can have the next slide, please. So what changed for us in 2015 added a number of the other South-South cooperation modalities and really strengthened UNICEF's capability and capacity to curate knowledge, to document good practices, and start to develop project management methodology, a complete end-to-end implementation toolkits, to create and design learning programs that would build the capacity not only of our own organization, but much more importantly, of those health workers, of those frontline workers across various sectors in our government counterparts to use these tools and to build them further. We also took the approach of establishing the Global Innovation Center and treated that as a center of excellence. It has as one of its 4 objectives the nurturing of South-South cooperation in all that we do. And so, as you see, that means being able to identify solutions coming from the South, being able to connect resources, capabilities, intellect, and experience and enthusiasm across the South, and to be able to share and implement those solutions among countries of the South. I'll point out a couple of these modalities that were particularly important. I mentioned the documentation piece, but also various communities of practice, somewhat less formal than they are than well-managed communities of practice are these days, but were created, and they were created, for example, around specific areas. So groups of people who were interested and who were applying in Rapid Pro within the health sector or to health applications. There was a very strong community of developers who were the ones who were doing the technical development, and I'll speak a little bit about them later. Next slide, please. Well, what all of these modalities enabled was what we're calling Bread in the South. And this is, we had Rapid Pro, the platform, but what became much more interesting was not how people replicated it or adopted it, but much more about how countries adapted and built new functionality and developed things further. And what we were able to do, having this architecture that operated as a center of excellence, was to be able to guide, advise, and work with countries like Cambodia, so that when they added interactive voice recognition, because Khmer script doesn't actually exist on a cell phone, and literacy is a significant challenge, that interactive voice recognition solution and functionality could be built in a way that was immediately accessible to every other country using the platform. Next slide, please. In the same way, when Mozambique, who applied Rapid Pro to create weekly nutrition monitoring, added airtime transfers, because the challenge in their environment was people were using their own phones to do the mobile reporting, and obviously that cost them some data and that cost them some airtime, and sometimes people didn't actually have the phone credit. So to ensure there was an uninterrupted reporting stream and to address that bottleneck, they innovated and introduced this functionality, which has now gone on being able to use elsewhere in very different ways. If next slide, please. We also learned from countries like Indonesia, who have extensive use of the Rabbit Pro platform in their digital health monitoring. So, for example, they have run their country's largest immunization campaign of 17 million children. They've run national BedNet distributions that track the BedNets down to specific villages. And this is in a country with more than 17,000 islands, which is a challenge all on its own. But in a complex environment like that, what they were really interested in doing is understanding and building dashboards to distill this flow of information and to turn this into action-oriented triggers, highlights, and allow, for example, a district health officer to know where it was he or she should be taking action. And so what we have learned from the work that they have done in very close collaboration with the government of Indonesia, Ministry of Health, has provided us insights into the global dashboard design. And we've actually combined that with input from 17 other countries across all of our regions who are very interested in that functionality as well. A final example in the next slide, please, is one that I find particularly inspiring. It comes from Senegal, where as part of our training for community health workers, we showed those health workers not only how to do the reporting, but how the system actually works. And we went away and then learned later that what this group of community health workers had done was build their own flow system to create a medical evacuation solution, essentially. And it was in a lot of the rural areas where there are very few ambulances, and it had been impossible to know at any time where the ambulance was and how to get one. And what they were able to do was build something that connected ambulances and health facilities, and they did it themselves with no support from any technologist. Next slide, please. And I've referred to this being a solution built by the South. And this, we take this actually very seriously because Rabbit Pro actually, as you saw, was an idea that was what came out of Rwanda, Zambia, Uganda. But there are a host of developers who, many of them voluntarily pro bono, have identified and contributed code and solutions to improve the solution and the platform for everyone. And this really relates to our applying those specific modalities you see on the screen. If you move to the next slide, you can see a number of examples of what this means. So it is the Cambodia startup who designed the interactive voice recognition. It is developers in Hungary. It's programmers in South Africa and Kenya who developed dashboards and automated response systems. It is developers and technologists in Brazil who connected Line, a communication channel with more than 500 million users, especially across Asia Pacific, and also coders in Brazil who are looking at how to apply artificial intelligence to allow us to respond to the tens of thousands of messages that flow in looking for advice on any range of subjects. Next slide, please. So we said it was born, bred, built in and by the South. It has also been something that has been scaled by the South. And there has been sort of a tremendous community of countries that have become mini centers of excellence on various aspects of the solution, who have helped to document and share good practices, lessons learned, tweaks, advice, and who have been part of a really joint capacity building process. If we move to the next slide, I'll give you one example of how this has worked. So taking, as you've seen, very much at the heart that this is a global community around a real-time information solution, we were helped to put together South Africa and Uganda, who were about a year and a half ago looking at a solution that would help them and their partners to quickly sort, manage, and respond to tens of thousands of messages that were coming in through the platform to them on quite different subjects. They had each individually been looking at building out a solution, but because we're a global community and we have a center of excellence that the GIC supplies, we were able to connect those two projects together and reduce the funding required to actually build those out, to use developers who were in those countries to actually create and develop that solution, and to ensure that that functionality was built in a way that would immediately, A, address the needs of both those original requirements, but B, be built in a way that could really easily be adopted and adapted by other countries. And as you can see, within a matter of months, Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Indonesia had picked up the same sort of referral mechanism, and we always call it sort of a light case management solution, and been using this, for example, to manage real-time menstrual hygiene management campaigns, to respond to and prevent and provide information on cholera campaigns, cholera prevention. So again, this global community scaling amongst each other. Next slide, please. I mentioned, and you've seen that we've mentioned partnerships as a key modality that was important. And I haven't chosen to speak about it until this almost very last slide, because it really is a factor that has moved across every aspect of our work on the platform. What you see here are the logos of a number of companies, private sector organizations and foundations, as well as academic partners who have helped us to build out, to fund the implementation of, to fund the development of certain functionality of RapidPro. So essentially, they have been part of the powerhouse that has helped to drive the scale up and to support the way that we have achieved this. But there are, of course, a number of logos that are not on there. There are, it's simply sort of lack of space. But for example, youth partners like the World Scouting Association, the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts who use this, who use RapidPro. There are those of us amongst the UN family, UNHCR, WFP, ITU, WHO, UNDP. Each of us have collaborations or individual uses of this solution. And next slide, please. What we've seen is from 2014 to 2018 has been a move from a handful of countries by taking this very South-informed approach. We've reached 52 countries and benefited directly and indirectly almost 100 million people in many different ways. So whether it is in health, in program management, in real-time monitoring, in cash assistance grants, facilitation, and especially in fulfilling the rights of young people in terms of the children's, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, to be able to be heard and to be able to advocate for their rights and the issues that they wish decision makers in their lives to take care of. But these, of course, are just numbers. The real impact is in the stories of, did we reduce stockouts of key malaria drugs? Yes, by 60%. Did we manage to influence policy through use of any of these solutions? Yes, and I think Liberia is probably one of the most commonly shared examples where an entirely different approach by government to sexual harassment in schools was driven by the application of real-time information among young people. And have we contributed to more accountability and more transparency, and both in humanitarian and development circumstances? And yes, those are all true, and there are many examples of that. And those are really the stories of impact that we are proudest of. I didn't want to end without mentioning the next slide, that our principles of innovation, which are shared amongst more than 35 partners in the development community, align very well with South-South modalities, in particular the understanding and working with the ecosystem and being collaborative. And so finally, last slide, please. The story doesn't actually end here. It's not only about being born, bred, built, and scaled in by the South, but I'll end by sharing that, in fact, the solution is now being adopted by the North. So we have also supported the United Kingdom, France, New Zealand, Canada, and Ireland and the city of Houston to implement RapidPro, which is proudly born and presented to you from the Global South. Thank you, and back to you, Martha.
Thank you, Tanya, and thank you very much for sharing with us this very exciting work. So it is very clear that with the use of low-cost technology and innovations, we could actually make a difference in the children's lives and in advancing the SDGs. And we are also very happy to see that a number of South-South cooperation modalities are being applied. There is a tendency amongst existing work at the moment where South-South cooperation is sometimes equated with study visits. And we are very happy to see that in your presentation, the study visits were not highlighted. We would be very happy to see the technical assistance facility, the centers of excellence, and the global community of practice, because definitely we will have a lot to learn from that. We just have one question for you on the role of the government. We will have the the second UN high-level conference on South-South cooperation that will take place in Buenos Aires, Argentina in March 2019, and it will be very helpful if some of the governments active in this work could actually take that forward in the global discussion to include this work in the global agenda for South-South cooperation in the coming years. Over to you, Tanya, please.
Sure. And I think that that actually this whole sort of specific topic is an interesting one, because I do think that people have tended to think of South-South cooperation in a particular way. But as you three organizations have pulled this together and shown, technology and innovation and the way that these are built and replicated can be excellent examples. So I think that it is quite possible to involve governments in sharing their experience. At the high level, at the HLPF, we had a number of governments who have adopted and used elements of Rapid Pro for their SDG monitoring, and particular the citizen participation aspects. And I think it is exactly identifying opportunities like this, and governments who will be willing to share their experience. And I'm sure amongst the 52 countries we can find a number who'd be very glad to do so. So I'm happy to facilitate that.
Thank you so much, and also thank you for demonstrating to us that the South-South model is also, there is also the South-North model. So that is a very unique example that we will definitely share with other colleagues, that it can really happen. It's not just So thank you again, Tanya. And if you have any, the audience, the participants, for any questions to Tanya, please post them on the web chat, and we will address this towards the end of all the presentations. So with that, let me hand over now to Maria Eugenia Socio from the Regional Center for Studies on the Development of the Information Society under the auspices of UNESCO to present on Global Kids Online. Over to you, Maria.
Thank you, Marta. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are in the world now. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you today. And I am certainly happy to share with you our experience in South-South cooperation initiatives for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals for children in Brazil. So today we'll share at the very first moment some brief thoughts on the role of evidence generation in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals for children, give you some insight on UNICEF Office of Research Global Kids Online project, and tell you a bit about the Brazilian experience, or also other Latin American countries' experience in South-South cooperation initiatives for evidence generation on children. And finally, point a few lessons learned by us in the last years. So if you could go to the next slide. I would like to start with the very idea that technology, and in particular information and communication technologies, have been recognized to play a crucial role in promoting sustainable development and achieving the 2030 agenda. So in this context, generating evidence on access to and use of technology has become crucial for tracking the progress towards the SDGs. However, most countries in the Global South still face major gaps in the production of policy-oriented data for monitoring the SDGs, especially when it comes to data on children and, of course, their use of internet. So if you could go to the next slide. This is actually the context in which the Global Kids Online project is set. So for those who do not know the project, Global Kids Online is an international research project that aims to generate a cross-national evidence base on children's use of the internet, including or even especially in countries of the Global South. So one of its most unique characteristics is maybe the fact that it aims to do so by creating a truly global network of researchers. Global Kids Online was actually already born as a collaborative initiative, originally between the UNICEF Office of Research, the London School of Economics and Political Science, and also the EU Kids Online Academic Network. In the next slide, you can see that, well, the project actually originally developed a research toolkit that actually enables academic researchers, governments, civil society, and other stakeholders to carry out reliable and standardized research with children on opportunities and risks that are associated with their use of internet. The research toolkit was piloted by research partners in Argentina, the Philippines, Serbia, and South Africa, all of them supported by UNICEF country offices. These partners not only tested the research toolkits developed, but also contributed then to demonstrate how research results can be used for policy and practice in their national context. In the next slide, you can see how much the Global Kids Online Network grew since its conception. So countries like Brazil, Chile, Uruguay, Ghana, Albania, Bulgaria, Montenegro, just to mention a few, have joined the network and have conducted comparable research on children's use of internet. And I can tell you that an increasing number of countries have been applying to join the network as well. And this is, I guess, an interesting example to demonstrate the relevance of North-South, South, or South-North cooperation when in complement to South-South cooperation initiatives. In the next slide, I will tell you a bit about the Brazilian or the experience of Brazil and other Latin American countries in South-South cooperation for producing data on children's use of internet. So what you can see there is the Latin American Kids Online Network, which has been working in partnership with both Global Kids Online and the EU Kids Online Network for a couple of years. Brazil has been certainly a pioneer in the region with annual representative surveys since 2012, actually. And the Brazilian Kids Online survey was enabled by a joint effort between the Academic Network, EU Kids Online, and the Regional Center for Studies on the Development of the Information Society in Brazil, where I'm based. Since then, research has been conducted in Argentina, in Chile, in Uruguay, and we have also studies in Costa Rica and Ecuador underway. So as a result of the regional cooperation within Latin America and with other regional or other global partners, actually, upcoming studies will be compared both within the region and with other countries. In the next slide, when talking about South-South or North-South cooperation, I should probably also mention that I am right now sitting at Innocenti's office, working on a research report of countries which belong to the network. And in fact, this type of collaboration has been extremely valuable for building a truly global network of researchers. Some other examples of it are regional and international work meetings with the objective of raising awareness, for example, on the relevance of evidence-based policymaking aimed at children, funding provided for countries and researchers to participate in those meetings or to work on common projects. And last, also experience sharing and capacity building. The Global Kids Online Research Toolkit, to mention here an example, presents all the key elements for countries willing to produce policy relevant and internationally comparable data on children's use of internet. This document is available at the Global Kids Online website, which is globalkidsonline.net. And it was developed along with country partners, experts and other international advisors, including those from the Global South partners. And well, and I guess other examples would be regional and international comparative research reports produced by partners in the network. And in next slide, let me now move to my last point. Actually, I would like to highlight the importance of building one horizontal, 2 cross-national, and 3 multi-stakeholder partnerships in order to engage Global South countries in the process of evidence generation. These partnerships must include not only academia and governments, but also civil society organizations and the private sectors. I consider this an essential and strategic approach to both connect evidence with policy making and to generate value for children in countries of the Global South. So I would even say that the Global Kids Online Research Toolkit wouldn't be even possible without the insights of all of the partners in different countries. And that's it. So to finish, I would just like to mention that the points that I have addressed today express the view of my organizations on the importance of South-South cooperation for producing policy-oriented data. And yeah, with that, I would just like to thank you all for your attention. If you have any further questions or for those interested in more information about the Global Kids Online project, I would be more than happy to talk to you.
Thank you, Maria, for that excellent presentation, and also for highlighting that South-South cooperation, like in Tanya's presentation, takes different trajectories of North-South, South-South, and ways of connecting the countries to each other. The Global Kids Online was also presented at the last South-South Cooperation Global Expo in Turkey, and that was very well received by the global South-South cooperation community. So we are very happy that we are hearing more about this work. One question that we have for you now is to maybe share some challenges that you have in implementing this program. Over.
Well, we have many challenges, but certainly I would say the most difficult challenge in our view in the Latin American network would be really trying to coordinate so many countries with such different contexts towards a common research toolkit. Meaning that we acknowledge all the differences between the countries, and we still want to have something common so that we can produce comparable data. And this is really only possible with much cooperation, much horizontal cooperation. And this is like this research is all the time a work in progress.
Thank you so much, Maria, and to all the participants. Again, if you have any questions, please type them in and we will address them at the end of the last presentation. So we now turn to the third presentation on Upshift. And for that, we have Hannah Sahat-Kia to make the presentation. Over to you, Hannah.
Hello. Okay, so I'm trying to put the camera on. You can see it.
That will be nice if we can see you, Hannah, but we can hear you very clearly.
That's good. So I'm not sure why I can't click on the camera sign. Yeah, the button for the camera is disabled apparently.
Hannah, if you will,
yeah.
go ahead and make the presentation, and I will send somebody to your office to help with the camera. Meanwhile, you could.
All right, thank you.
The presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, so my presentation is going to be about Upshift, which is a social impact program that started in Kosovo about 3-4 years ago. I'm going to take the approach of explaining the South-South cooperation modalities for Upshift from the perspective of the country office of Kosovo. So next. Okay, so just to give you a bit of background on how Upshift was born and where is it located within the UNICEF program in Kosovo, I'm just going to give you a quick overview. So the UNICEF office in Kosovo has a component called the Innovations Lab. What the Innovations Lab focuses mostly is the work at the nexus of young people, empowerment, employability, and technology. So we have 3 different main pillars within the Innovations Lab, focusing primarily on, the first one focusing primarily on social entrepreneurship and professional skills, so skills for life and skills for work. The second one, which is a youth empowerment platform, it focuses primarily on advocacy, on civic engagement, on young people's empowerment. And then thirdly, there's the third pillar that focuses on technology, tools, and skills. So pretty much all of the programs, the initiatives within the Innovation Lab overlap into multiple pillars, but for the moment, Upshift is focused on the social entrepreneurship and professional skills component. Next. So what is Upshift? Upshift is a program that was designed to help young people, primarily the most marginalized and vulnerable young people, to become social innovators and entrepreneurs. How we do that is by combining a continuum of experiential learning experiences. So having the practical side of building solutions, coming from community challenges, understanding, assessing the community needs, all the way to designing and building solutions that are a response to those community challenges initially identified. So while going through this structured continuum, the young people learn a series of skills and practically build products and services that ultimately also can lead to social ventures and social enterprises. So why is Upshift interesting is that it uses a modality of human-centered design, participatory action research, and it is focused on young people, from the building and development of the product itself, of the program itself, all the way to actually remodeling it and putting additional versions, updating additional versions, such that we come with the program that we have today. Next. So the 3 key goals, I would say, that Upshift focuses on, at least in the ecosystem, in the environment in Kosovo, is that it firstly builds the professional readiness of young people for sustainable livelihoods. The idea behind this is that there's a large number of young people, who are unemployed, not in education or training in Kosovo. So the idea was to build a program that gives the skills for professional readiness and for sustainable livelihoods. Number two, it builds resilience and civic engagement. So we noticed that young people in Kosovo feel very disenfranchised and do not feel connected and empowered enough to communicate with the institutions, to build civic engagement. So this was one of the other goals that we really tried to focus on. And then thirdly, building the ecosystem. So with the social enterprise component that Upshift has, it is our goal that we build an ecosystem of social enterprises, of startups, and we build a momentum of young people who are ready to move on to adulthood and to the next challenges and embrace them in a much more resilient way. Next. So just to give you an overview of where Upshift is today. So Upshift started in Kosovo, but as you can see in the slides, now it is present in a multitude of countries, and there's another dozen of countries beyond the ones that are mentioned here that are in the exploratory phase, interested in deploying Upshift. So from the perspective of the Kosovo office started supporting a number of these country offices up until when the Upshift portfolio essentially was scaled and was also taken over into a global level by the Global Innovation Center, in this case Tanya's scale portfolio as well. So these are some of the countries that we started with. We initially started with Montenegro, with Tajikistan, with Vietnam, and then there was a trigger effect where a number of other countries started exploring and getting into the idea of Upshift. Next. Okay, so what are the components, the key components of South-South cooperation within Upshift? So again, from the perspective of the Kosovo office, the four key components of South-South cooperation are the exchange of knowledge, the exchange of resources, capacity building, and another essential component is the partnerships and collaborations that get built. So to focus a little bit more on the exchange of knowledge, this essentially goes beyond the study visits that were earlier mentioned. There's the different components that we focus on are secondments, are the various missions of professionals back and forth. But of course, another key component for us here is the exchange of knowledge between stakeholders, between participants of Upshift, between institutions. So beyond just the project staff, beyond just the people, the key people that run the program, it was essential for us to also build the exchange of knowledge among the participants of the various programs in the cross-country format. And then go beyond that into trying to engage also institutions, the implementing partners of the various countries, etc. When it comes to resources, what we mean by the exchange of resources is essentially trying to build the monitoring and evaluation framework, the technological tools utilized, the various different tools and resources that the program necessitates, so that they are not necessarily built from scratch in the other country, but rather replicated and adapted to the country context of the other country. The other component is the capacity building. So there's definitely been a lot of capacity building from one country to the other, building not necessarily only the capacities of the project staff within UNICEF, but rather working with the implementing partners, working with the mentors, working perhaps with the existing ecosystem of incubators and accelerators that are necessary to push the program forward. And then finally, partnerships and collaboration. Although I've put it here as a separate component, I would say that partnerships and collaboration goes beyond one component, but it's an overlapping component that goes across all of the other ones. So essentially, as I mentioned earlier, the institutions, the young people, the accelerators and incubators are part of every step of the way, from the initial exploratory phase all the way to launching and implementing Upshift. And as I move to the next slides, you'll see that on a more practical basis. Next. So this slide just lays out some of the modalities that I just mentioned. So in terms of the exchange of expertise, there's of course the technical assistance and the knowledge exchange, and these entail different components such as missions, such as secondments, the trainings in terms of capacity building, and then global and regional meetings. So just last year, we had a major global meeting on Upshift in Kosovo, where there were members of more than 22 countries in Kosovo exploring and exchanging the ideas and lessons learned and working on how to essentially bring about an Upshift 2.0 that incorporates the lessons and the analysis coming and stemming out of all the country offices that have been working on it so far, and the country offices and contexts where we are just building and exploring the idea of incorporating Upshift into the program. And then, of course, exchange of knowledge. As I just mentioned, it is essential that the technology gets transferred, the tools get transferred, not only because it makes the program launch and the program implementation easier into the other country, but also for cross-country analysis purposes, for streamlining Upshift tools and technology in a way that it could be much more cross-cutting. Next. Okay, so I briefly mentioned earlier some of the key partners that are involved into the South-South cooperation modalities for Upshift. Young people are a key partner for us, not only in the building of the program, but also in the exchange of knowledge and experiences and sharing of experiences of how Upshift has impacted their lives and impacted their skills and knowledge, etc. So whenever there's a collaboration with another country, one of the first things that happens is the country program officers come to Kosovo and the young people who are participants, who are alumni of Upshift, meet with the potential partners, meet with the project officers, so that they exchange essentially the nature of Upshift, they exchange the experiences, and really get the idea built of what it means to have Upshift in the program. Another key partner is the implementing partner. So the implementing partner are a really crucial partner for us when it comes to South-South cooperation. They are, together with the UNICEF team, they are some of the key people that do the capacity building for the implementing partner of the other country. They work hand in hand with UNICEF to really convey the tools, the knowledge, the messages that Upshift would need to have in the other country office as well to work just as well. Institutions are another really important partner, and this goes both ways. So it is important for the new country who will be deploying Upshift to talk to the institutions in the initial country, in Kosovo or in another Upshift country, on how Upshift has been incorporated perhaps in the frameworks, in the legislative or policy frameworks, or how Upshift has cooperated with the institutions to be deployed in the education system, perhaps in the non-formal education structures, in the various components, depending on how is it being implemented in that particular country. And then finally, and yes, okay, on the institutions. The other key component on institutions is for our team to talk and discuss and elaborate with the institutions of the new country who wants to get Upshift, so that we really understand the policy context, we really understand the bottlenecks or the opportunities that the institutions of this particular country offer for Upshift to be incorporated. So with the institutions, it's particularly important, this duality of objectives, this duality of partnership, both from the institutions of the original country and the institutions of the country that wants to undertake Upshift. And then mentors are another very important component. Mentors are the ones that work with the young people throughout the process, throughout the Upshift program. And it is important for also mentors to convey the messages and the experiences that they have had with Upshift in order for supporting the implementation on the other country as well. Next. So this slide just gives more of a chronological perspective on how the South-South cooperation begins and where it ends. So we start with the initial discussions with the team in the other country, discussing the policy framework, social context, and the capacities, organizational capacities, what the ecosystem looks like, etc. We go beyond working with the UNICEF country office in trying to work, as I said earlier, with the institution, with the potential target group, with the potential implementing partners, to really get a sense of these three components: the policy framework, the social context, and the capacities, so that we begin to understand how the engagement with partners will look like and how the program needs to be adapted and replicated. And then we move to the next phase, which is the co-design of the strategy. So in this sense, we really work closely with the UNICEF country office and with the key stakeholders that the country office envisions to have throughout the program implementation. So the young people, the key institutional partners, perhaps private sector, in the case where the country office really wants to highlight the social enterprise component, the CSOs, and the potential implementing partners. There's essentially a co-design of the strategy, I would say, so that the engagement of partners is laid out in a timeline sense, in a step-by-step fashion, and then the adaptation of the program starts taking shape. In several instances, the program has not necessitated a lot of adaptation, but then there have been instances and cases where the program really needed to go for a full adaptation process, where a lot of the components needed to be modified. So in this case, the co-design really helped a lot. On the technical support, which is the next phase, we really focus on supporting the country office on designing their proposals, perhaps in the sense where the country office really needs to start building their proposals for financial resources. We start building the implementing partner process of selection, so that the best implementing partner that is best catered to the objectives of the program gets selected for further implementation. The other component is, of course, the exchange of resources, where the technology that has been used through Upshift, the tools, the M&E framework, the documentation, facilitation guidelines, etc., gets transferred to the new country offices to really have the resources and the base from which to build up next. And then another key component of the support process is also the launch of the program. So in the month or so preceding the launch of the program, there's a lot of back and forth, there's communication, there's exchange of ideas and exchange of lessons learned, and when possible, there's also the presence of our team with the new program country office to support the launch and to make sure that everything is going as planned. And then with every one of the country offices that we've supported, we've really tried to make sure that there's also rounds of debrief, rounds of monitoring and ensuring that the program is going as planned, exchanging of lessons learned, and as I said, the debrief for potential modifications and potential renewed adaptations up until we get to the point where the program is in a satisfactory process and and we're ready for the country office to go with it beyond our support. Next. So this is the final thing. I would say, what is the added value of South-South cooperation in this case? Well, Upshift wouldn't have been into so many countries and wouldn't have reached the scale of essentially a global product for UNICEF if it wasn't for the initial South-South cooperation that happened between the countries. So that is definitely the added value of the South-South cooperation. It has managed to get a grassroots initiative that started in an innovation lab in Kosovo and build it up to a point where now it has scaled in a multitude of countries. Some of the key lessons learned in this case would be that perhaps the analysis and information exchange between countries, there is room for improving there, primarily because it makes it difficult for analysis of impact and cross-country evaluations if the information and the analysis exchange is not satisfactory. So that would be one of the key things to improve as we move further. And this is the other comment is a much more general comment. So greater support from regional and central institutions. This has not been the case with Upshift. Upshift has gotten a really good support, especially from central institutions. And here I would really have to thank Tanya and our esteemed colleague Catherine Crisp, who have taken over and really started supporting all the country offices, and they're doing a tremendous job, and that's why there is a boost of so many countries exploring Upshift as we move further. But in general, South-South cooperation, when it comes to grassroots initiatives starting from the ground, a much greater support from regional and central institutions would mean a much more successful scale up of these initiatives into possibly other contexts as well. So that's it from my side.
Thank you very much, Hannah, for this excellent presentation. And we thank you for sharing with us this exciting and innovative work on engaging young people in development cooperation. One question we have for you is if you could share with us your insights on meaningfully engaging young people in development cooperation, because definitely that is a challenge for us in the development community.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So one of the key essentially key features of the Innovation Lab in Kosovo is engaging young people meaningfully throughout the process of the program. So as I mentioned earlier, Upshift was initially developed with young people. So putting young people at the center of action, understanding their needs, and working together as partners in developing the program itself. So considering that this is one of the core features of the Innovation Lab, and in this case of Upshift as well, meaningful engagement of young people throughout the process has been essential to us too. The different mechanisms which we use for meaningful engagement of young people in South-South cooperation is, number one, having participants and graduates of Upshift of Kosovo discussing and sharing their experience and lessons with initially the project team of the other country. The other way in which young people are engaged meaningfully is through the co-design of the strategies of the engagement in the hosting country office, so in the new country office. So we really do not encourage other country offices to build on the program without having young people be partners in the build-up of the program. Every one of the countries have their specificities. That is why it's important that the young people of that country are engaged in the replication, in the adaptation of the program to best cater to their needs in that country. So these are two key components in which we try to engage young people. There are other discussions, but those haven't happened yet, where potentially in the next year or so, we would have young people from the region, at least, country offices that have been deploying Upshift, get together for an Activate talks, get together for or an engagement where they can share the experiences of Upshift. But that is still in the ideation phase, whereas the meaningful engagement of young people in the process has been by developing the program together with them.
Thank you, Hannah. So we now move on to the Q&A. We have 5 questions which we will address today. And so let me just read the 5 questions, and then I will give the floor to the presenters to address them. So we have a first question. The first question is, if you can please elaborate on what are the next steps in scaling up Global Kids Online using some of the South-South cooperation modalities. Question number 2, how do we promote innovativeness at the community and civil society and the type of approaches in a country like Ethiopia where there are few civil society engaged in child protection? Our third question is also from Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, with an estimated 100 million population and few mobile apparatus, costly and limited access, how do we use mobile technology, particularly using community-based structure, which are really strong? Question number 4. Thank you again for the opportunity to discuss South-South innovative ideas to support children. One question addressed to Maria is the challenge on connection of evidence with policy making, particularly for child protection programs, such as preventing violence against children, justice for children, and others. And the final question is on Upshift, very informative presentation from Hannah. How have the governments been involved in Upshift scale-up process? So with those 5 questions, I will hand back the floor to the presenters. Let me start with you, Tanya. Over.
Sure. So I think just looking at a couple of these questions here. So I think the really interesting questions from Konjit in Ethiopia. Thank you so much. I think your question, the questions you asked was around promoting innovativeness in community and civil society. And I think it's a question that we ask ourselves in terms of how do we also promote innovativeness in our own organization and in the context that we work in. And one of the ways I think that we see as a mechanism for infusing innovation and also some of the skills in order to look at a challenge or a barrier or a problem in one's local community is the example that that Hannah has just spoken about in terms of using a process like Upshift to do that. But I thought your questions about the specific context in Ethiopia around mobile phone and connectivity infrastructure were especially interesting. And yes, we ourselves would agree with you there that this is a challenge. Ethiopia is one of those countries that we have not yet been able to scale Rapid Pro as a real-time solution to. But there are, perhaps different ways of looking at that. As you point out, there's strong community organizations and a strong community context. There's also, as we've looked at it, for example, there's 15,000 health posts. There are health centers that have been looking at moving off a paper tool and being able to, be able to move information much faster using mobile technology. Health workers are actually responsible for a huge number of actions in the health system. So that's just sort of that alone. But it would be an environment where the solution would be looking at not just being able to use the infrastructure and people's normal accessibility to handsets. It would be a solution that would sort of have to look at much more of that context. And then I wanted to sort of flip that around and also say that it's also not a solution that we sort of think, what's that saying? If you hold a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That it isn't necessarily that has to be everywhere. So I think that as we've seen, implementing these solutions in, for example, Yemen, where we're trying to monitor in real time the cash assistance grant that UNICEF is managing on behalf of the UN system. You're dealing with a very difficult context where you physically cannot go to different places, where you've had the infrastructure severely disrupted in some areas, and those are things that one has to account for, because there really isn't almost any ideal circumstance, even in contexts with the greatest connectivity. Then you're still dealing with, do you design a solution that makes the most of interesting things that smartphones can do, or do you design things, for a context where you're wanting to be assured to reach the most marginalized person who is yet not even that marginalized because they actually would have access to a mobile phone. So I think the bottom of it is to always recognize that the minute you're talking about technology, there is automatically a group of people excluded, and that may be a very large group or a small group, and we have to design our sort of solutions, understanding we address only some part of the communities and the populations that we're dealing with. But let some of the other panelists talk to some of the other questions, and I can come back always later. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Maria, you have the floor.
Okay. I see here one question. I will start with question number 4, which is aimed at me. So as far as I understood, the colleague from Ethiopia wants to know about the challenges in the connection of evidence with policy making, right? So, well, I guess I would say the biggest challenge in that is that most of the data is not really produced. It's not actually policy oriented. So most of the data which is produced especially in global south countries, they do not actually respond, or they do not answer to policymakers' questions. So I think this is the most difficult challenge. And besides that, I think in some cases we also don't have actually a understanding of how important it is to have evidence-based policy making, right? So this is what I would answer to the first question. Then we have one question, why exactly is comparability of data so important? Are there instances of mutual learning without comparable data? Yes, of course there are. But from our perspective, and I'm talking from a data producer's perspective here, from our perspective, the importance of having comparable data is actually linked to the importance of having data at all. So in many countries, especially in the global south, policymakers do not have an idea of, let's say, how big the problem is or what is going on in terms of the child population. And especially for policymakers, being able to see their countries in relation to other countries might provide them with interesting insights of what might be going wrong or how they can improve their policies. And of course, only data and only comparable data doesn't bring about any change. But linking this data to programs and policies, then we begin to have effective changes. I think this is it, right?
Thank you so much, Maria. Hannah, before I hand to you, let me just read 2 more questions that came in, and these were addressed to you. Could you give a concrete example of a project component and its adaptation of an upshifting process? And the other question is, it is an amazing discussion on young people engagement presented by you, Hannah. The question is regarding the implementing partners. What are they? Private and public sectors, academics, institutions. Over to you, Hannah.
Okay, great. So I'll start with the question on the government's involvement of Upshift. So one of the key reasons why we really want government to be involved from the outset, especially when Upshift starts its process of implementation in a new country, is for sustainability purposes. It's really important that the government has a buy-in from the beginning and they're involved for it to be afterwards introduced into the education system, into different structures, institutional structures as well. So when we do the context analysis, we really want to understand what are the different components, different institutions playing a role in, so that we try to involve the ones that can make the most influence and can support Upshift the most. So I can give the example of Tajikistan. When Tajikistan started exploring the idea of Upshift more than a year and a half ago, we went to Tajikistan and we really had long debates and discussions with the Ministry of Education to really try and understand where Upshift fits in the education model of Tajikistan. Ultimately, we ended up discussing with them and agreeing that the Centers for Additional Education, which is a feature of the education model of Tajikistan, more of the non-formal sector, was the best fitting modality for Upshift to be introduced in the system. So those were the centers with which we started working together with the project team to really introduce Upshift. And Upshift was launched about a couple of months ago in Tajikistan. So as you can see, there was a lot of preparation, a lot of discussion with the government as well. So that would be one example of how the government is involved. But then again, considering that the contexts look very different from country to country, it really depends on the structures, it depends on the system, the government structures, how we get involved with the government. So that's more or less on the government involvement. On the adaptation of a particular component, so I can give a couple of quick examples. So for instance, in the beginning, when young people do the community needs assessment and really try to understand the community challenges before they start building solutions to them, the young people are skilled to go out and do some interviewing, some surveying in the community, some observation and ethnological research to understand the community needs. This definitely changes depending on the context. So for instance, when you have contexts that are more humanitarian or post-humanitarian, when you have contexts that do not allow for, let's say, girls being out in the street interviewing their community, perhaps this is one of the components that we focus most on for potential risk potential for the different social and cultural norms of the context. Another one is the financial literacy component. So that again depends a lot on the legislative framework and what that allows and what it doesn't. And depending on the framework and the legal ramifications, this component gets modified significantly every time. And then again, of course, you have the other components that modify depending on the various facets of the context as well. On the implementing partner, initially we started working with CSOs that are equipped with the necessary skills to support us. Increasingly so in the past couple of years, at least in Kosovo, we have been implementing Upshift with academia. We've been implementing it a series of cycles with private entities as well. And we've been exploring different modalities where there's triple, quadruple helix models where multiple different stakeholders are engaged into the implementation. Depending again on the context, you have Tajikistan where they're implementing it together with the government. You have other contexts where it's being implemented with a variety of implementing partners.
Thank you so much, Hannah. We have a bit of time for another final round of feedback from the presenters. So let me just read a couple more questions that came in, and then I will hand back to the presenters. So one question is, what are the key criteria for a replicability for a relevant experience between South-South country? Another question is, why exactly is comparability of data so important? Are there instances of mutual learning without comparable data? And then we have one comment. Let me just read a comment from a participant. What we have noticed in Africa, we have many relevant innovations, but unfortunately many are expensive, sometimes for South countries for the replication. So back to you, Tanya.
Sure. Great. So I would take both of Umar's good questions. I'll start with the first one about the key criteria for replicability. And I think what we've seen in our experience of having worked on solutions which are both they can appear in any sector. They are in a wide variety of country contexts. So, we're working, for example, the same platform in a high middle income country and in a fragile state. Is that the question that we always begin with is, what is the programming objective? How is this sort of addressing a specific need? What is it meant to do in terms of accelerating results? And I think it can be a potential problem where there's technology, where there's sort of so much interest to implement the thing or the new thing or the shiny thing that often that is something that's very enticing. So a lot of conversations, we spent a lot of time in the first probably third of any project that will eventually end up, or perhaps doesn't end up in implementing something, is really unpacking where does this fit into the objectives of the country program. So we always come back to that. So therefore, the key criteria are begin with those, that we need to be convinced that, is this the right solution? Is this the right approach? Is technology even the thing that ought to be looked at to address a specific need? And I'm talking, I should have said, not only specifically about Rapid Pro, but across the 6 or 7 things that the Global Innovation Center does scale, and those include not only technology-based solutions, but also approaches such as applying human-centered design to sort of do service design in our work. And what we found, not only you start there, but we also look at sustainability as a key criteria. We look at who the key stakeholders are locally. We look at integration with the local ecosystem. And this could be looking at the implementing partners that Hannah was just sort of giving us some examples about. Looking obviously key at government partners, where private sector is important, for example, perhaps in supporting, sustaining, funding. We look at that, because what we don't want to end up with is supporting something that runs and then falls apart, because there's no because of the sustainability issues. And then also from an internal perspective, we are also look at the capacity of our office, and we also look at what the staff movements are. So it's very important to understand, both politically, but from a human resource standpoint, is the greatest champion of this project about to be rotated in 6 months' time, in which case you recognize that as a risk and you mitigate it, but it is something that we consider. So there is a whole set of criteria. They're part of our implementation toolkit that we kind of step through to exactly answer the question, how can we do this successfully, and is this the right thing to do? And then to your second part about the costs, so that, one of the, I guess, criteria or objectives, and one of the things that having a kind of global center of excellence enables, is to take a very hard look at how to make invest in support solutions that do not cost a lot to move from place to place. So in alignment with our innovation principles, we are always dedicated to open source solutions. So you're automatically removing licensing fees or some kinds of structures for software that start to charge people more when there are more people involved. We get very much involved in trying to negotiate free or low cost channels, so communication channels. So for example, in Nigeria, we're very fortunate to have no free SMS for programs there that have a couple of million people exchanging information on it. So cost is a major barrier to not only the first place that you implement it, but to any other place that would be interested in replicating it. And there are different ways of addressing it, but it is a good point to bring up. Let me pass on to other colleagues. Over.
Maria, over to you.
Well, the question about the importance of data comparability was actually the second one I answered, so I guess this is already addressed.
Thank you. Hannah?
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I think Tanya was very comprehensive with her answers.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our presentation, so of our webinar today. I want to thank the presenters for highlighting the power of South-South cooperation and the different modalities of South-South cooperation to advance the rights and welfare of children. We always believe in UNICEF that South-South cooperation is a powerful tool. And so thank you very much, colleagues, to Tanya, to Maria, and to Hannah for showcasing that very well today in the different projects that you presented. So to close, let me just thank the organizers of our webinar today, Karine Fernandez Farina from IPCIG, and from UNICEF, Maya Nilmark, and also to the support provided to us by Yannick Roll and Aline Perez dos Santos of IPCIG. Please join the community of practice on South-South cooperation for children that is hosted in socialprotection.org. And also please join the socialprotection.org community. With that, we thank you and we close the webinar for today. Thank you all.
Thank you.